Hello, our nightmarish creatures. We hope you enjoyed all of the Burnsville series so far. As we've been told, there is still more to come. So, as soon as it arrives here at the Hallowed Throne, we will gladly feed your appetite for more creepy tales from this small town. But for now, enjoy tonight's Creepy Tales. The Burnsville series by GAMINGMASTER141. Narrated by dark little voices. Once a Full Moon by GAMINGMASTER141. It's early in the morning as people awake and begin to prepare for the day. Dew soaks the ground, leaving a wet presence across the village. The people never leave the village. The grounds around this place are forsaken by law. A terrible presence haunts this village. Once a full moon. It's a happy place despite the strange happenings. Children play and laugh. The youth get into trouble and play tricks on one another. The parents work during the day and the elderly watch this happen daily. There's no worry until that night once a month. Once a full moon. The town of Burnsville, Wisconsin was built here almost 2 centuries later. On this fateful day, a young man, Tom Jones, the ringleader of many pranks played by the youth of the village, played on the poor victims, dared a boy, no older than 10 years of age, to step into the forsaken grounds for no more than a minute. He did so, not wanting to appear weak in front of his peers. Moments after the first step, he was pulled into the ground by an unseen protagonist. The children screamed and ran about, trying to get away from the forsaken grounds around the village. Running for their parents and homes, they screamed. When the story was exposed, Tom was to appear for a hearing by the people of the village to determine a punishment worthy of such a horrid act. Tom faced the angry crowd. He saw his mother crying and his father scowling with a look of disappointment upon his face. Tom couldn't look at his parents anymore. The shame was hitting him hard now. Fat tears rolled down his face. His ears burned of embarrassment.
Who shall speak to him first?
A member of the village's council shouted into the crowd. The mother of the boy stood up and walked swiftly to Tom. She stared at him angrily for a moment before slapping him across the face. A man from the crowd pulled her back. This sent Tom's mother into more tears.
Inform us of what you have done, Tom.
The same member said to him. Tom hesitated, his head full of shame.
Tell us, Tom!
He yelled again.
I told him to go in the forsaken grounds for only a moment.
He sputtered. The crowd gasped in horror. It was true. He had done the unthinkable.
What should we do about this?
A different member asked. A man from the crowd yelled.
Throw him into the grounds.
The crowd roared with this while Tom stuttered.
No, the moon is full tonight. It won't matter.
Another yelled.
We'll tie him up at the post so he can't run when night falls.
The crowd roared louder.
It is decided.
A member shouted, and the crowd roared once more. 2 men hoisted him off the ground and brought him to the center of the village. Large ropes bounded him to the post. He watched the people go by for hours until sunset. He became more and more frightened by every passing minute. While others went to their homes and hid in their basement, he watched the sun, continuing his last minutes. Once a full moon, he said to himself. Darkness fell upon the village. Shadows vanished. No one was outside anymore. Silence made goosebumps arise on the back of his neck. A terrible screech shattered the silence. He saw things running into the village. Glass shattered and people screamed. Once a full moon. People torn apart. Blood sprayed the houses and grass. Tom watched all of this from the post. Once a full moon, echoed in his thoughts. More screams. He saw corpses head for the forsaken grounds. His time was up. Once, a full moon. Those things walked slowly towards him. He recognized people who had deceased years ago. The things were the town's dead. Once a full moon. He didn't scream like the others, just closed his eyes. The dead tore into him, pulling out organs. Blood dripped from his body. Once a full moon. Once a full moon. More came tearing off his limbs and ripping off skin. Once a full moon. Once a full moon. His breath left his lungs. Once a full moon. And he lowered his head. Don't Go Down the Street with No Lights by GAMINGMASTER141. My name is David Stonefield. I am 19 years old and I work part-time for a hole-in-the-wall pizza diner with the best pizza within miles of my town. My job is to deliver pizza to customers in the city of Burnsville, Wisconsin. My work hours are odd. I deliver from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. every other night. The job pays well because Burnsville, despite being a small town, is dangerous at night, but not always because of its residents. I'm a big guy, so people don't hassle me when I deliver their pies. The night sky was clear and filled with stars. As I pulled up to the diner, I saw a man sitting on a long wooden bench in front of a bush across the street from me. It wasn't a strange thing to see, just I'd never seen him before, so I shrugged and parked my car outside of the restaurant. I paced into the diner and walked into the kitchen.
Hey, David! Perfect timing. Got an order for you.
My boss said to me from the other side of the kitchen. He was a fat man, probably over 250 pounds, but that was of no concern to me or the customers because you don't trust a skinny chef. He handed a stack of pizzas to me with a sticky note that had the price and the name and the house number of the buyers on it. I glanced at the address again and noticed that there wasn't a street listed on it. It simply said, "Look for the street with no lights." I felt the warm, greasy box touch my forearms. Flour grinded against me, not sharp or even painful, just the signature of a good pizza shop. I grabbed my name tag up off the bowl by the door to the kitchen while holding the cozy pizzas. It was a cold night, so when I stepped outside the shop it wasn't as frigid with the pizza. I opened the passenger seat to my car and set the pizzas in the thermal bag and slowly zipped it up. I wasn't sure how I was going to find the street with no lights. Burnsville is no stranger to strange happenings, but I've never heard of the street with no lights. I pulled out my smartphone and opened Google Maps. It was an older phone, so it took some time to load. Not long, but not fast. Finally it loaded, and I typed into the Burnsville area search bar, the street with no lights. And somehow I was given a location. I set route and put my phone in the cup holder. This better not be some joke, I muttered to myself. This location was across the city far from any light population. I drive listening to the hum of my 2002 Honda Civic. No radio, no music. I kept pondering, what the hell is waiting for me out there? The thought echoed in my head. I had this feeling of impending doom. It's probably just some prank call, I kept telling myself. The feeling kept getting stronger as I got closer to the street with no lights. If I die out here, no one will ever find me. I was maybe 500 meters away from the street when I saw a man. A big man. Tall, muscular. He was wearing a mask that appeared to be a rabbit. It had gore smeared across its hairy face. I just kept driving, not wanting to draw his attention. I turned on the street with no lights and stopped my car. I looked on the note to see the house number. It said 9 on it. I looked out my window and saw number 9 on a house a few doors down. I got out of my car and grabbed my pizza bag from the passenger seat and walked slowly down the dark street. I checked my watch as I reached the door. 3:12 a.m. What the hell? I left 20 minutes ago. I walked to the door from the driveway and rang the old doorbell. After waiting for 3 seconds, the door creaked slowly open, but no one had appeared to open it. Hello? I got your pizza. I called into the house. No response. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a crazed kind of laughing voice call out, "Food." At first, I was relieved, but that voice made me uneasy in a different way. I heard my phone ping a notification. My ringtone was a duck because, why not? I set down the warm bag of pizza on the doorstep and pulled my phone out from my pocket. The screen lit up my face and made it difficult to see for a few seconds. It was a news alert. It read, "Earlier this evening, a man who went by the name The Buddy Man escaped the Burnsville insane asylum." My stomach lurched after reading those horrible words. I just stared at them, unable to free my mind from the phone. Utter shock. I saw him less than a mile away. I wanted to call the authorities, but I couldn't seem to open the dial-up menu in my phone app. I pressed the power button repeatedly, but still nothing. I put my phone away in my pocket. When I looked up, a man was standing there. Not just any man, though. The Bunny Man. The blood-smeared face was sickening. I stepped back a step. His bloody face was hypnotic. I finally drew myself away from his face and noticed he was holding something. And it wasn't the $25.50 he owed me for the 2 large pizzas. He gripped a steel axe. It was crimson red with sparkling blood across the head of the axe. Who did he just kill? The thought lurked in my mind. I noticed behind him there was a mangled corpse with its insides all over the floor in a bloody massacre. Guts and tendons lay coming out of the beheaded neck. More guts and intestines were coming from its stomach. "Please, don't hurt me," I said, crying. The corpse made me vomit the second time as I glanced at it a second time. He hadn't moved an inch during the time that we faced one another. His sudden motion startled me. He gripped the axe with a second hand and raised it above his head. His ears brushed his hands lightly as he brought it down on my chest. He removed it and hacked at it like he was cutting down a tree. Blood sprayed in all directions. I crumpled to the ground, barely alive. So, here I am. As inhumane and disgusting as it is, I'm writing this in my own blood. Use my life as an example. Don't visit the street with no lights. The Mirror Man by GAMINGMASTER141. Hello. My name is Joshua Stonefield, and I'm 17 years old. I live in Burnsville, Wisconsin, and I will never leave it. Too many memories haunt me here. My brother David died a few months ago by a deranged killer. That moment destroyed me. I've grown fat. I've dropped out of high school. I've destroyed my life. And it's my fault he's dead. Don't call it self-blame, it's not. I showed him the job application. He worked as a pizza delivery boy at a hole-in-the-wall pizza shop. I've contemplated suicide several times, but the thought became unbearable when I thought about my mother. She'd be alone if I left this world. My dad died 10 years ago in a car accident. My mother won't last much longer, I'm presuming. His death hit her hard. I only have one friend left, Bill Brown. He is also 17 years old, and he stayed in school unlike me. He deserves a good life. He always stuck by me. Always. Even when we explored the house where one of Burnsville's most famous happenings occurred. That's not the story I'm telling, though. This is much darker and much more terrifying. I sat alone in my room on my bed, staring at the TV. Bill was bringing my groceries to me. I felt bad about him doing that. I hadn't asked him to, but he knew if he didn't, I wouldn't, and I would starve myself to an early grave. The news was on. I was watching intently. A story about an invisible man who was going rampage. I laughed at the utter stupidity. Fools don't see this as fake, I said, shaking my fat head. I reached for the plastic, grease-stained TV remote. I pressed a small rubber button to change the channel to something less preposterous. I switched it to some game show. I sat there amazed with myself. Astonishing. A skinny kid became severely obese in less than 3 months. My stupidity got the better of me, and I let myself go. I had a life ahead of me. I was a top performer on the varsity baseball team at Burnsville High. I owe my life to Bill. I picked my fat behind off the old bed, stood still for a moment thinking whether to follow through on my plan. I tried pulling on my shoes. Somehow, my large feet managed to squeeze inside, grabbed my keys and stuffed them into my shorts. I yanked open the door and closed it behind me. The lights in the hall were blinding. I blinked rapidly, trying desperately to see the world again. I walked down the hall, looking at the golden numbers embedded into tens of doors on my floor. I stumbled into the sunlight and froze in its light. I looked around for my car. I barely knew what it looked like anymore. I saw trees for the first time in months. The air tasted fresh and clean. It was mesmerizing to see the world again. I felt like a baby may feel, witnessing life for the first time. I found my car, not by the license plate or even the brand. I was the proud owner of the ugliest car in Burnsville. It was a greenish yellow Honda. Just like David's, I thought, fighting back tears. God knows how old the hunk of metal was. It was covered in dust and dirt from sitting still for months. When I locked myself away, I had no intentions of coming out of my chamber. I had no clue where Bill lived, but I made it my mission to make it to his home. I saw an older woman, probably in her early 40s, walking down the sidewalk. "Do you happen to know where Bill Brown lives?" She thought for a second and spoke.
I'm sorry, who are you?
"Joshua Stonefield. Bill's my friend," I replied quickly.
Oh my gosh, how didn't I recognize you? I was your 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Williams.
We stood there for a while. "So, do you know where Bill lives now?" I asked again.
Oh yes, he lives right next to the Quick Trip.
Mrs. Williams told me. "Thank you," I said and climbed into my car. The engine roared back to life when I popped the key into the ignition lock. I drove slowly to the Quick Trip and pulled into the parking lot. I didn't need to get gas, just a gift for Bill. I grabbed the extra $10 bill I kept in the glove box and strode into the Quick Trip. The cold air from the store hit me like a wave. It was refreshing and felt great after getting out of my stuffy car in the middle of summer. I saw a box of assorted chocolate and snatched it up and brought it to the cashier. "Josh?" he asked. Oh shit, it's you. Man, I haven't seen you in months. Where were you? I was home. I spoke. His name was Tom Wilford, another faded memory from high school. The whole time? Why? Oh, I'm so sorry, Josh. I should have known, he said to me. Don't worry about it. Just don't say it again. I stuttered, handing him the box of chocolate and the $10 bill. He took the money and handed the box of chocolate along with the change back to me. I walked out of the gas station without another spoken word. That kid has been through too much, Tom thought to himself sympathetically. I walked over to Bill's from the gas station. I walked quietly up the path to the house. A loud crash came from within the house. Bill? I shouted. No response. I rang the doorbell 3 times. I stood for a minute waiting for someone to answer, but nothing. I wanted to call the police, but my phone and internet had been shut off 2 months ago. Yet again, my stupidity got the better of me and opened the door to his home. Bill! I called again into his house.
Josh.
A soft voice came from the bathroom on the 2nd level. I jogged up the carpeted steps and waited to hear his voice again.
Josh.
The voice cried. I ran into the bathroom and saw Bill on the floor. His shirt was drenched in ungodly amounts of blood, and he was surrounded in broken glass from a mirror. I stood in shock.
Help me, Josh,
he whimpered, grabbing my leg. Who did this to you? I asked urgently.
Have you seen the news? He did it,
he replied to me in tears rolling down his face.
No. That's just a prank. It can't be real.
I said back. He moaned as he pointed at a shard of broken glass. A man stood looking at me inside the glass. His face seemed burned off, and he was clutching a bloody glass shard. He had chunks of missing flesh. He stared at me but never moved. Suddenly, my chest exploded in pain. I tore off my shirt, exposing deep red slashes in my chest. They spelled Bill. I howled in pain. After several minutes, the pain calmed down. I looked back at the shard, but the man was gone. I looked down at Bill, only to see his mangled corpse. He was gone. The last person who really cared about me. God.
No.
The Extraction by GAMINGMASTER141. Matthew and I walked to school just like any other day. It wasn't a normal day, though. Far from it, in fact. My name is Harvey Cook. I'm a sophomore at Burnsville High in Wisconsin. It was a cool morning in October, the scent of dew bombarding our noses. There was a wet, humid sensation in the air. Not uncomfortable, but it made the day feel slower. It gave the sidewalks a pleasant dampness to it. There's nothing like an early morning walk in the fall or spring, assuming you've had your coffee. The sky was a cloudy gray with a little bit of sunshine on the horizon. The school was visible down the road, probably 100 yards away. The school was an old brick building built in the 1950s. It had a clock in the tower on the top, as any good school should have, of the structure. We walked quietly together, absorbing the nature and breathing the fresh morning air. I could see the students scattered across the schoolyard, slowly making their way into the building. Matthew looked uneasy today. I wasn't sure why. But he didn't say anything, so we kept walking. He'd tell me if something was wrong, right? The thought lingered in my skull for the last part of the walk. My mind was elsewhere as we entered the building. I was still thinking about Matthew. I couldn't shake the thought that he was hiding something.
Take off your hat, young man. It's disrespectful to your teachers.
What? Sorry, I was stuck in Wonderland.
Aren't we all? Now, your hat, take it off, son.
The school guard said. His name was Officer Woods. He was nice enough, but he made it his mission to uphold respect and discipline. He's probably in his early 50s and well overweight, but he's all we got. He started working at the school 2 or 3 years ago. His wife, Mrs. Woods, got a job at the local hospital. She's a nurse. She gave me my tetanus shot when I was 10. Right, sorry, I replied. See you later. He nodded without saying anything and took a sip of coffee.
Don't worry about him,
Matthew said.
Let's just drop our stuff off at our lockers and get the hell to class.
You okay? I asked. Are you sick or something? You didn't get drunk, did you?
No, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? And you know I don't drink.
He snapped. He'd never snap at me like that before. It was almost startling. Like when a kid gets told off by their parents for the first time. It can bring them to tears. Not that I was crying. Sorry, you just looked off.
Well, I'm fine. Now come on,
Matthew said. Nothing disrupted the slackers and couples in the hallway, though. Stephen Williams and Kathy Hopkins were entangled with each other. I'm sure you can guess why. And the senior guys were on their phones talking about girls and cars. Our lockers were past the seniors and down the hall on the left. We walked slowly past them, hoping they wouldn't see us. I tucked my hat back on. The seniors at our school are not people you want to mess with. Last year, they set a fire to a park on the other side of Burnsville as a prank.
You see that guy on the news?
They whispered.
That guy in glass murdered a guy and almost killed another.
The event they were talking about occurred just a few days ago. It was one of the strangest things that happened to people here. The victim's body was covered in blood and stab marks, but the autopsy revealed no such thing had taken place. No one could understand what really happened that day. It appeared we were in the clear until I heard a voice behind us. Hey, jackass! You heard about the guy who got killed by the Mirror Man? You're next, creep! He wasn't talking to me, though. He was talking to Matthew. Matthew has an ungodly number of mirrors in his home. His mother is a glass blower. She sells mirrors, vases, and glass flowers at her shop. Ignore that dipshit, Matthew, I told him. He doesn't know the difference between his asshole and his mouth.
Don't worry. I'm well aware,
he said with a chuckle. We walked the next 20 feet, making jokes about the seniors and their stupidity. Our lockers were right next to each other. To the left of mine, there was an old locker that had some weird smell coming from it, like old ham. A truly disgusting scent. The one to the right of Matthew belonged to the girl he had been crushing on for the last 2 years, Georgia Ortega. He never seemed to be able to really talk to her, though. The only time I recall him talking to her was when she returned his gym shoe that he'd accidentally dropped in the hall. Even that wasn't a real conversation. All he said was,
thank you.
I entered in my code to the combination lock that hung from a small hole that slides up to open the locker. It was a rotary combination lock, very easy to pick. Last year, some guy broke into my locker and stole the $50 I had in there for my lunch. That was one exciting conversation with my mom. I dropped my bag inside and grabbed my books I needed for first period. I looked over at Matthew, who was doing the same, except in a sluggish manner. I couldn't help but sense that he was still upset about something. I didn't dare ask him about that again. I knew what would have followed. Matthew would have stormed off and probably wouldn't talk to me until lunch or, hell, even next week. Matthew and I had never had a major argument that ended in us not talking for more than a day, and he'd certainly never snapped at me because of a simple question like he had earlier. He closed his locker and we headed off to homeroom. Homeroom was right before first period and lasted about 30 minutes. Matthew and I always grabbed our first book before homeroom because we had first period in the same class. Exciting, I know. First period was math. By some inconceivable reason, it was Matthew's favorite class. I don't even understand the premise of that. Homeroom started like any day with the morning announcements and the Pledge of Allegiance, and followed by the teacher, Mrs. Williams, a former 8th grade teacher, taking attendance after that. She gave us some time to talk. Matthew, after school, do you want to get some ice cream? I asked. It's on me. He mumbled something inaudible, something under his breath. It gave me an uneasy feeling, like I was having a fever, but I wasn't.
I guess I could go for some ice cream.
Matthew said.
I'm glad you're paying, 'cause I like the big ones, but I can never afford them.
Just don't go crazy, I said, laughing. I'm not made of money, and I need you to be here tomorrow for the presentation in science. You can't be homesick for that.
Hey, you can't make any promises. You know how I am with food.
Matthew seemed alright again. He wasn't kidding about being crazy with food, though. Last month, he was home from school with diarrhea and a stomach ache for a week because he ate 7 spicy tacos from the cafeteria. I'm dead serious. This is 7. He's an animal when it comes to food. We spent the last 10 minutes of homeroom teasing one another for stupid things we've done over the years. I was just glad that Matthew was acting normal again. Hopefully, it'd stay that way. The guys from the other classes piled into the room and took their seats. No one was smiling. No surprise there. Can you blame them? It was time for math. Who other than Matthew is excited about that? The hour begun with a math problem that the teacher wrote on the board. Our course was Algebra 2. I'm surprised that Matthew didn't choose calculus or something like that. The teacher was Mr. Hart. He is probably in his early 30s, and he also teaches a few different courses to the other grades as well as ours. He isn't married, but he is engaged to some lady from Ohio. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she's nice. She works at the newsroom downtown. Math was fine and dandy except one thing. Matthew. Matthew didn't raise his hand at all or even do his work. This was highly unusual for him. He was always the first to hand in his papers and raise his hand when the teacher asked him a question in math. Any other classes would have been normal. The bell rang indicating that first period was over, and I grabbed my stuff and started for the door. Matthew, could you stay a minute, please? Mr. Hart asked. I watched as Matthew walked over to Mr. Hart's desk. I knew what this was about. I tried signaling to him not to mention his mood, but I don't think he understood me imitating Matthew getting angry. Harvey, could you give us a sec? Mr. Hart said. I walked through the door and into the hallway, but I hung around just around the corner to wait for Matthew. About a minute later, Matthew came out of the room. He didn't look mad, though. What was that about? I asked, pretending I didn't already know.
He wanted to know why I didn't hand in anything.
Matthew told me.
He tried to get me to go to the nurse, but I feel fine.
And what did you tell him? I persisted. You know, about the assignments.
I told him I was just really tired,
He answered.
that's all.
All right, but is that really the case? I asked. Dude, if anything's wrong, you can tell me. I won't tell anyone. You can trust me. I was really hoping Matthew wouldn't overreact to these questions, and he didn't.
Fine. Shit. All I can tell you is that something bad is going to happen.
Matthew said. What do you mean by bad? I asked. Matthew, what's gonna happen? I asked. I was happy he was listening and telling me things, but this only created new issues. I had to know what he meant. What does bad even mean to him?
I can't say.
But you will know soon enough. He paused for a bit. Promise me you'll stay with me, Harvey. Okay, but you need to tell me what. Promise me, Matthew said. I promise, I told him. He fell quiet again after that. Come on, Matthew, what's going on? Thoughts bombarded me for the next few minutes, but they slowly faded out as we walked into the science room. I found our table in the corner and sat on a stool. Matthew followed only a second later. The science room was always a bit colder than the others. Maybe it was the fridge that kept the dead animals for dissection and chemicals in it. Or maybe it was the windows being slightly thinner than the other rooms. Who knows? The science teacher, Mrs. Walker, was a former forensic scientist, so of course she taught forensic science. Today's lesson was about drugs and toxicology. She told us how to decipher the kind of drugs in someone's bloodstream to give a cause of death. This was my kind of thing. I was planning on being a forensic scientist for the police when I was older. I'd planned out college and everything.
The school's going into lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
The intercom announced. My heart rate increased heavily, but Matthew somehow looked calm. He closed his eyes and let out a slow sigh. What the fuck is happening, Matthew? I asked him. Is this what you were talking about?
It's time, dude.
Matthew said. Time for what? I asked. Fuck, Matthew, did you do this?
No, but I knew it was going to happen.
He answered. The others pushed desks and chairs in front of the door as is protocol in this situation. We moved to the wall where the door was so that we couldn't be seen. Mrs. Walker closed the blinds and rushed over to hit the light switch, and it went dark, and she crouched down with us. Matthew, tell me what the fuck you did. No! I said. I wasn't asking. I was insisting.
Shut up, Harvey!
Called another kid from the class. Suddenly, a noise came from the other side of the school. It wasn't a gunshot or anything man-made. A ferocious howl that echoed through the empty halls. Demanding the attention of its prey. It announced its presence. This is very unusual for a predator to do. Whatever it wasn't a quiet entity. God, what was that? There's no way in hell that was human.
Stay calm, everyone.
Mrs. Walker whispered to everyone.
The police are on their way.
They better be. The intercom came back on and said,
Stay calm. Local law enforcement has arrived.
I could hear the sirens blasting in front of the school. Hurried footsteps ran past our door and down the hall. The footsteps halted, and shoes squeaked on the tiled floor. They mustn't have been too far away because we could hear one of the officers talking.
He's further down the hall. Keep moving.
He? Who's he? That must mean it's a human. Probably the seniors playing another prank. The footsteps were too far to hear anymore. On the other side of the school, I heard a scream of utter terror. That kind of scream is unmistakable. The scream belonged to a girl, probably a grade or two below us. Some of the girls were crying and gripping anyone they could. The boys that weren't being strangled by the girls had their faces in their hands. The screams exploded down the hall from us. Then another howl from whatever was out there. The screaming didn't stop though, and it wasn't a female screaming either. It was a man. Men.
Fuck! What is that thing?
Someone shouted.
It's tearing into Jones.
Another yelled. Almost instantly after that was said, a horrible sound as if someone was being brutally murdered. Several loud plops followed. Not like a body being dropped, but more like a water balloon. Gunshots exploded down the hall for a few seconds, then stopped. Following this sound, it sounded like someone vomited. Then a heavier sound came. A thud. That was the body of Jones. I didn't need to see it to know it. It's disgusting sound. The fuck is going on out there? Curiosity is an amazing thing. It causes us to think about things that we are unaware of. The suspense of the situation was killing me slowly. I had that awful feeling that sits right below the sternum that makes you feel terribly sick inside. The sound of pain echoed out, and pure silence struck our ears. It didn't last long though, thumping as if something big was walking. Manly screams and gunshots broke out again, but it didn't stop this time. Slashing sounds, bodies dropping and slamming into walls and lockers, and big limbs hitting into the ground. It sounded like some enormous creature was out there in the hall. The officers were screaming in pain and shooting their weapons wildly.
It's fucking got me!
Someone shouted. Then a slam continued with a nasty crunch of bones. One by one, screams arose and were silenced until there was nothing. Pure silence. The same thuds came again. I heard glass shattering and heavy objects hitting the floor. I could tell whatever it was. It had broken into a classroom only a few doors down. Girls were screaming at the top of their lungs and familiar voices could be heard shouting for their lives. I could clearly hear my best friend from the 3rd grade shouting. The sounds were playing with my mind. I couldn't think. I couldn't speak. A lump was growing in my throat. Despite the sounds, a thought popped into my head. Matthew knew about this. People are getting hurt. Matthew, what is this? Tell me what the fuck is out there, I whispered.
I don't know,
He said.
they told me no one would get hurt.
Who told you? I asked.
I can't. They'll kill me.
He replied.
Well, I'm pretty sure we're both about to die.
I told him. He hesitated for a moment. He appeared to be thinking.
You got a point. Listen up. You only have time to hear this once.
He said, then continued.
So, when I was about 5, I was taken from my parents and put in a secret agency called the Order, and they implanted a circuit into my chest. They told me they would extract it one day, and no one would get hurt. Then they sent me to live here with some agents who looked like they could be my parents. And now, we're here, right now. That thing, he must be their extractor.
I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. My best friend, my only friend, was an experiment. What hurt most was that he never told me. Wow, I was not expecting that. That's some real shit, I said. During the whole time, I hadn't heard the thing move closer to us. Suddenly, a hand smashed through the door. Not a human hand, but a humanoid's long and bony hand. It had a wet, silky smoothness to its skin. The door fell off its hinges and dropped to the ground. The thing seemed to be compressed in a way. It crawled into the room and unfolded itself. It stood about 9 feet tall with a hunch in its back. It didn't have any apparent eyes. What it did have was 2 slit nostrils and a huge mouth filled with long and thin teeth in a shark-like pattern, in the sense that it had numerous rows of teeth. Its limbs were unproportionate to the rest of it. Each of its arms must have been 8 feet long, almost touching the ground. Its skin was thin and had worn, wrinkly quality to it, although it appeared slightly wet and silky on its hands. All its bones were clearly visible, with its spine moving like a centipede when it took in air. It breathed in an animalistic way, with consistent snort-like sounds as if it were struggling to breathe. It lunged for the boy who was closest to the door, Daniel Boone. He was a nice kid. He didn't deserve this. Nevertheless, it happened. The thing stuck its bony hand into his chest violently. It made a sickening sound, like someone stomping in shallow mud.
Oh fuck! Oh fuck! This guy's hand in me!
Daniel said. His eyes watered in pain as it pulled open his chest. It seemed to slap away his rib cage, and the bones snapped and fell out of him stained with blood. This massacre was making a disgusting mess of the skull. When I learned what the water balloon sound was, I really wish I hadn't. It was that thing scooping the organs out of its victim and dumping it on the ground.
No one else gets hurt. It's me he wants.
Matthew shouted. He stood up and faced the monster. He was calm. He just quietly accepted his fate. Matthew, don't, I said.
No, Harvey. I need to do this,
he replied. The thing dropped Daniel's hollowed corpse onto the bloody floor and slowly reached out for Matthew. It could sense Matthew giving into it and knew he wouldn't run. Matthew looked at me in a way that said goodbye without saying it. A hot tear rolled down my cheek. The same stabbing sound hit my ears and more tears came. It dug through him just as it did with Daniel.
Goodbye, Harvey,
Matthew said. Goodbye, Matthew. I'll see you soon, all right? Matthew's eyes began to water. It wasn't the physical pain he was enduring, but the emotional pain that was really killing him. And when the organs came out of him, the pain was finished. His life had ended so abruptly at such a young age. It pulled out a small chip from Matthew's corpse. I put my face into my knees and cried. It laid Matthew's corpse gently on one of the tables in the room. It then walked out the door and left without a sound. 1 month later. It's been a month since Matthew left this world. I've dropped out of school. I've cleaned my apartment belonging to my parents and written my notes. I'm going to see him again. There's nothing left for me. Most of me already died the day Matthew entered a better life. I'm coming home, Matthew.